the art, she said, can we have mention? And then I was like, just.
It's just like etiquette, like,
like,
a bit important.
but like, into the forums, and I was like, you guys just sort out how to do anything. Yeah. I said, I'm happy to do a bit for free, like, if you can still pay admin, I'll work with it if you want to. Like, you don't have to pay me overnight, like, I know there is no major issue. But yeah, look, that's really
Do you get refunds then?
yeah, so like if the candidate leaves in 3 months, you have to give a portion of her fee back. So if she left, like if she handed a notice in,
so I think it's because it's like 6 months before as well, so I think she only has to give like a week's notice.
yeah. But if it's 4 months, they'll probably be outside.
Good for them, not good for
Yeah, sounds interesting.
I think it's probably quite a different level of he's just picture there.
It's cash for the if you've got a big pay rush, you come back and you get a bunch of much better.
Yeah, it's better than like getting to lead over, isn't it? And if she's like not loving it, then it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Start on Monday.
Awesome. It's exciting. I have to speak to Annie now. I need to speak to
Poppy
now and see what's going on.
Yeah.
I'll get back to one of the guys in the team. Yeah. I'm surprised that didn't work out, if I'm honest. I thought that would work out. I thought they could maybe get on. Yeah.
How are we getting on then, guys? Are we going to record or are we going to...
It's apparently broadcasting on our channel, but we can share it, so you can put it on your channel, but we have to do it after. It's just a we have amount of time. We've done a contest, so it's
It'll be absolutely fine. It won't be, it's unlisted, so it's not actually streaming, it's just recording.
Yeah, so should we just put, because I've just conscious that we haven't advertised anywhere, so going on. Let's test how the format works. Make sure that we're all happy with the quality and the time of everything. Get away from the next one.
yeah, usually you need to test the technology first.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't like, and it's not working, it's like, we just told it. There's 1,000 people waiting to watch this, and we look like, it's all you need.
And I think you don't want to, what I'm saying, you don't want to prevent, you don't want to compromise people coming to the event either.
Yeah.
You see it sometimes. So,
Like
yeah.
the whole part is people coming live, they have chat, don't they? It's like streaming is good, but I think recording is great. And then sharing it out, people couldn't make it. But yeah, there is that, I suppose there is that. You know.
Happy to do that? So another live stream today. We'll record it, we'll test it, see how it gets on. We'll really control yeah? Hello. Are you all ready?
Yeah, all good.
Hey. Meet up? Yeah, the three will meet.
Yes.
Test, test, test. Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. Test, test, test.
There's drinks and food and things. Just grab a seat, whatever.
everybody inside of IR35. So they're not culling them, they're just moving them inside, and it's up to them whether they stay or not, which means that a lot of them will go, but some of them will stay, and then they'll have to rehire them in some shape or form. But it's the IR35 fun at the moment. We're probably 75% perm, 25% contract. So we are exposed, but we're not overly exposed. We launched some new solutions off the back of that, which we just to get around.
Test. This is a test. Test. This is a test. Test.
And then have some suppliers feeding into that base database. So if you get in and get those businesses, they should already have terms. But now they can't hire from that. It's sitting there, they need to turn it through. And that's what we're going to do. Lots of solutions plug into big companies that otherwise really hard. We might get one solution a year. Now we can kind of get in and out of their playing through the way we position ourselves really good. And we can kind of get into it. So it's good and bad. And we'll get into it. Hopefully, our new videos will get a little bit. It's like the biggest piece of legislation, certainly in my life.
Was it just like event like
yeah, so like if you're a contractor, we have discussion. We takes so long to get procurement to get through. Like, so but it's a really interesting in that. Yeah, it's definitely but yeah, it was also but they're all waiting until
they have quite a long time to.
They'll just get you going on something. And the ones that run this project, this is a fault. They'll be like, okay, what do you want? Yeah, they'll be like,
Wait a minute.
we have to tell them as well, then, like, yeah, you? Good.
Good.
Teaming, actually. Oh, really? Never gets oh, contractors. Yeah, he's going back to BCS. Oh, really? Yeah. And we have to start with like project games.
And it just proves that we can sort of do it.
Oh yeah, why not? I'll sit down. Do you have a clicker? No, it's no big if you don't. That's alright. No rush. You should have asked this like off. You know what? It's not.
So thanks for everyone for coming to first event of 2020. So we have Adam here, who's from Immersive Labs, so he's currently travelling all the way from Bristol this evening. Rachel was from his presence. So I'll let Adam kind of introduce himself more fully. Thanks, Adam.
Okay, so first things first, I had a kind of weird cough type thing a couple of days ago. It's mostly cleared, but my voice might not be its usual kind of self tonight. So if it suddenly goes up and down in places, apologies in advance. So my talk tonight is on moderated remote user research and how it can be used in lean UX. I've been practicing UX for about 14 years now. And I work at Immersive Labs. I'm head of user experience there. I've got a kind of great team. We're building on building. To break that statement down more basically, we're building a product that teaches people to hack by sitting there actually hacking stuff. So it's designing for like quite a technical audience, which is a bit of a change of pace for me. And spent the last 9 years running a UX agency in Bristol. We did like quite a lot of digital products, software as a service stuff, but also a lot of consumer e-commerce stuff. Had clients like National Trust, BMW, Unite Students, but also kind of tech startups. We actually, ironically, had Immersive Labs as a client at one point and also did some stuff for Digivante as well, who are a Cheltenham-based crowdsourced testing platform, designed in the last year as well. If you ever got to Sheffield, we redesigned all their ticketing kiosks for trams and that sort of thing. I don't think that's actually live yet, but it will be soon. We redesigned all their ticketing stuff as well, trying to create like an integrated user experience. Designed a task management app for dyslexic students. So yeah, all sorts of interesting UX and design projects. So. 3 things really. This talk is primarily about why I love remote moderated user research and tend to advocate it, tend to use it and say it's my preferred methodology. I'll go into it in a bit more though. What I think it's good for and also what I think it's not good for, how it doesn't work sometimes. There are certain situations it's really useful for, but that nothing's perfect. And also how you can potentially use this technique to introduce iterative research into your design process. So just kind of a show of hands, how many people here kind of work specifically, maybe have UX or design in their job title? Just show of hands. Okay, any developers? And we've got one? Yes, excellent. And what about kind of other roles, maybe product owner type roles, project managers? Yeah, cool. Have I not covered anyone? What do you do?
Product management.
Product management, okay, fantastic. So, yeah, so I think there'll hopefully be something to take away from this. I would say though that, bit of a bold statement, but ultimately I believe if you're not involving users, it's not user experience. I think that sometimes it can be difficult to get buy-in to do so, but ultimately, we're drawing grey boxes based on maybe best practice, maybe assumptions, maybe copying someone, but without involving users, it's not user-centered design and thus not user experience. But it's okay if you're not, because I think everyone's been there at different times in their career. And actually, I'm hoping that what I'm going to talk about today might give you the power to do that more. So just kind of show of hands, who here has tried remote moderated user research before? 3 at the back, fantastic. So feel free to hack away. But of the 3 of you, who would do it again? Okay, good, yeah. I did a variation of this talk at UX Live in London a couple of years ago, and basically like a load of people who tried it before took their hands down. I was just like, shit, this isn't good. But no, it was fine. I think by the end I'd kind of managed to win some of them back round. So let's talk about kind of types of user research in general. So here, as with everything, we've got kind of a weird quadrant type thing that these are definitely not all made up. But basically, what I've tried to do is plot different types of user research based on kind of cost versus effort. So, for example, I'd say the highest cost and highest effort thing is probably putting together a co-design workshop where you get a bunch of, like, loads of people in one place, you get all the materials, you kind of book them for a whole day, and typically with users and kind of work with them in that space. Those are often pretty expensive to hook up. You can get a lot of benefit from them. Next up, probably the kind of one-to-one lab-based sessions, especially if you've got quite specific participants who you've had to get proper, well-recruited screened participants. That can be very expensive. Ethnographic research I've put slightly lower down because quite often it might be a high cost of time to get your UX team to wherever the people are to watch them, but actually quite often people let you watch them work for free or buy things, or especially if you're doing consumer-led stuff and you need to go sit in a shopping centre or a bus station for a couple of days, people might even throw money at you for doing that, right? But it's we've also got diary studies, so again, reasonable incentive. You don't necessarily need to go as high. It depends really what you're trying to get out of people. They can be a fair bit of effort though, especially because you need to keep encouraging the participants to actually say stuff to you, and remember to fill out their diaries and give you useful stuff. So relatively lower cost, a little bit of effort because you do have to analyze it. Things like self-moderated, so like usertesting.com, what users do if that still exists. F. But yeah, it's at the end those kind of self-moderated platforms which do. I always get loads of LinkedIn spam from people trying to sell me those. It seems like they always last about 2 years. But ultimately, I can't give lectures on running solvent businesses anymore, so I'm going to shut up on that one. But basically, those ones, they are definitely an option. And then you've got the kind of more guerrilla kind of going up to people in coffee shops, bribing them with various drinks or cakes or whatever else you have to hand. Then over kind of reasonably high cost, but maybe lower effort in terms of time, providing you use kind of digital. Well, you can do lab-based card sorts and tree tests. Then you've got kind of remote card sorts. Especially tree testing, who actually does face-to-face tree testing much anymore? Just because the maths is a lot easier with stuff like Optimal Workshop, right? But then you've got surveys, click tests, split testing, call lists. So you've got a bunch of different research methods. And I think, I've called this a historic split. This is I did a survey of a bunch of UXs, so it's kind of self-reported but generally, a lot of people were doing mostly lab-based research, those who were doing research. There was a kind of 10% maybe doing more kind of self-moderated or guerrilla methods. And another 10% kind of said that they often, I'm describing this all wrong. So basically, we got people using kind of to indicate how much time they spent on each thing and did the maths from there. This was a little while ago now. But basically, there's kind of this is quite small, it's kind of interesting. People weren't really using data a lot, the ones we spoke to. And here's my quick definition of remote moderated user research. So my view is about taking advantage of modern tools available to us, not necessarily dedicated user research tools, but just all the tools around us, to conduct user research with a moderator and a participant who are in different locations. And I think applying that, if we could get that same value of the interaction between the moderator and the participant, using some of the technology available to us now, I think we could do far more remote moderated. I think there are instances where there's no substitute for lab-based research. I'm not saying that should be a thing of the past. Along those lines, so breaking that down a bit more, there's things like code design workshops. There's certain situations where it's not right, and there's definitely more vulnerable audiences as well. Sometimes it's better for them to, or more kind of right to do it face to face. Sometimes you have to have people who are chaperoned as well, which works better in those kind of circumstances. And honestly, especially based on the results of that survey, I think the world has moved on a little bit since I first worked that out. But effectively, we should be doing more with data. I know that it's maths, but often the best research insights come now when you kind of can triangulate different sources of data, both kind of quantitative research, qualitative research, and build up a full picture. But the talk tonight is mostly on the qualitative side of things because we don't want to be here all night. So why remote moderated? Why do I think remote moderated is a good idea? I think quality of insight. Now this is an interesting one because often people would say there's no substitute for sitting face to face with someone in a lab. But actually, I think being in a lab can influence people's behaviour because you're putting people into like an unfamiliar context. So if you think about how you interact with digital products, typically it might be on a train, it might be at home. You know, if you're doing your online shopping, you're not normally in a kind of a specific lab-based environment unless you're kind of a scientist who's slacking off a bit. Hey. So basically, that was terrible. But effectively, you're taking someone out of their context, you're putting them in an artificial situation, and you know a whole kind of moderated session is artificial enough. But if you take someone out of their context and just place them kind of in a lab, actually that can impact the quality of insight. Speed. So remote moderated, I believe that typically it's quicker to set up. Participants don't have to travel necessarily, so you can make arrangements a lot quicker. Typically, I find the recruitment time is a lot lower, and we use third parties to recruit the participants as well. And ultimately, as well as that, if you've got maybe multiple people who can moderate sessions working on your team, you don't always need someone to be you don't always need to kind of involve the whole team in that. You could run multiple sessions at the same time. I think the record back at my old place is we managed to, between our team, we had 5 people who could moderate, and in the morning, between us all, we managed to do 10 sessions, and then analyse it in the afternoon. It was kind of it was a weird. There's no really such thing as emergency user research, so that's probably. But effectively, we were. It was for a project for a large student accommodation company who I probably did name earlier, but anyway. And effectively, they had a kind of arbitrary deadline imposed on them to make some decisions around the product by IT. And rather than acquiescing and just saying, "Oh, we'll bin off the user research," they said, "Can you do it quicker, please?" So yeah, so we did the moderation reasonably fast, but then we had more time to do the analysis, which I think is where a lot of the value came in. Costs. So often you've got fewer. If you have a dropout, so participants often drop out whether you do face-to-face or remote moderated. It's kind of a fact of life. If you are sat in a lab waiting for someone to turn up and then the participant doesn't turn up, you kind of wait around because it's, UX people generally quite a valuable resource and they're just kind of sat there waiting for people to turn up. Whereas at least if it's remote moderated, often if they're going to be doing it on their computer anyway, there's opportunities to get on with something or read something or kind of continue to develop. But the main thing is around incentives. So actually you don't need to pay participants as much often for remote sessions as face-to-face, which means your budget can potentially go further. More on that later. Access to participants as well. So often the people that you need, perhaps the potential users of whatever the thing is that you're designing, they're not always necessarily going to be able to just swan off at like 10 in the morning or something from work, spend about 45 minutes travelling to wherever your usability lab is, or the usability lab that you've rented, or the meeting room that you've kind of appropriated and stuck some cameras in, and they're not always going to be in a position where they can do that. So often then you can often, I guess, restrict who your participants are based on where your sessions will be taking place. Whereas remote moderated, if you're primarily doing a B2B product or you're primarily dealing with an audience, like a more affluent audience who can't just kind of run off from their responsibilities in the middle of the day, actually you can access them remotely. Just get them to do it on their lunch break or something, and actually it's very easy for them to nip in a meeting room for 45 minutes. It's a lot easier than taking like half their day out for this. It also enables you to observe participants in their natural habitats. So, like I was saying earlier, context is really important, and there might be certain things, certain kind of distractions or other things you get to see participants actually in the circumstances they may be using your product. So I've had a few interesting ones around that. I had someone kind of stop midway through a session because their cat had decided to have a fight with another cat outside and they were making a lot of noise. But what's really interesting about that is then when the participant came back and they began to kind of continue this transaction that they were going through a kind of shopping checkout journey, they couldn't quite remember something that came up earlier. So then it gave us a useful research insight because then we were able to we kind of say, how can we make that particular really important thing more memorable? So often, that's one example, but there are often little kind of snippets you get from that. And the other good thing is those of you who've got clients or internal stakeholders or other people, maybe product owners, product managers who want to see your user research. If they want to see it live, they don't need to be kind of sat there, perhaps getting involved in the session. They can observe it from anywhere. So it makes it a lot easier. It's not just clients. It's ultimately, if we're doing user research, it can be really handy for everyone working on the product, whether it's developers, whether it's project managers or other people who are involved in making the decisions. Ultimately, making it really easy, it's quite easy for them just to have it on in the background whilst they're continuing to do what they want, and occasionally they'll pick up on things. So it makes it kind of almost democratizes user research, because it makes it way easier for people to actually observe the sessions, demystifies it a bit, takes away a bit of the UX theatre. There are certain things it really doesn't work well for yet, though. So accessibility side of things. Now, actually, for some participants with disabilities, it can be really good. Like we've had lots of participants who weren't particularly mobile, but they didn't use any assistive technology either. And actually, they found that they could participate in our remote research sessions. It was good for them in terms of they got the incentive from it. They were really valuable participants as well. But there are certain when people use assistive technology, the tools that we use for remote moderated research don't always work so well with that yet. Co-design workshops, so as I was talking about earlier, I have attempted a kind of information architecture workshop with a bunch of people who are in like Sweden and other places using Miro and Zoom, and it sort of worked, but it's not quite there yet. The people involved in it were they were kind of working client side. I think if we'd paid for the participants, however much they were per day, on top of I don't think it would have been considered a success, because it was still pretty difficult. There was probably maybe because of language barriers, but I don't think the tech's quite there yet for this really involved in-depth stuff. Participants' poor connectivity. So some tools are better than others at handling when the internet connection drops out. But if someone is one of the people who just has no connection or has 2 megabits or something, it's probably not going to work for them. So maybe telephone interviews are a form of remote moderated research, but at the same time, it doesn't always work well especially if you need to do things like usability testing. So if you wanted to try this, what do you need? So the first thing to do is pick a tool. Now, there are lots of tools. So you've got things like Look Back, for example, which is kind of dedicated tool people have made for this. But then there's lots of generic off-the-shelf tools as well. So there's things like WebEx, there's Google Hangouts, Skype, Zoom, GoToMeeting. There's all these tools popping up, things like Blue Jeans now. There's loads of other ones, and they all seem to vary in quality. Typically, after assessing loads of tools, we typically landed on Zoom. Now, I haven't. It's not Zoom don't pay me, unfortunately, for plugging them in this, but basically the reason that we found this generally worked for most participants, and that's a bit of a generalization, I think there are usability issues with the tool itself. Like sometimes people often, when they load it up, they'll get the audio selection settings, and it disappears behind the window and they can't find it. I have fed that back to their UX team, because it's almost like we've done a bunch of usability testing for them, but anyway. But basically, overall, that seemed to be the one that we could get to work in the most environments. It seemed to be the most tolerant of ropey internet connections. It was reasonably priced, so that ticked the box for me. But ultimately, pick the right tool for your users. So if your participants say you are designing an internal B2B application, primarily all the people who use your tool use Google, maybe Skype for Business, then sorry to say it, but you've probably got to use Skype for Business to talk to them. It's about really, these things are much of a muchness. Look back is a useful tool, but generally I would suggest more generic tools are better, because the chances are it's less hassle. If you can pick the one that works for your participants, then it's less hassle, for less of like learning curve to get them on it. Because ultimately, if we're testing how easy things are to use, if you need to be like kind of a rocket scientist to get on there in the first place, or like kind of some kind of like tech genius to get it working, then you're going to be screening out a lot of participants who might be interested, or be able to provide you with useful insights. And what is the most important thing about user researchers is to have the right participants. There's probably a whole different talk in this, but ultimately, like, if I know in some companies there's often pressure to like just test with internal people, and you might get some basic usability stuff, but you miss all those kind of contextual and behavioral insights around the actual people you're designing for. I would also say that people who claim to be one of the users, but they are involved in designing or developing that product, they are not a user. They've taken the proverbial red pill. They've and they've kind of like seen behind the veil. Is actually they're aware of all the business context. They are not a user. So I think often like people will compromise on that one, but genuinely it's really important to find the right participants. And trying to do it yourself on like LinkedIn or something is not always that easy either. I've sat there and made like huge efforts to try and recruit participants. Actually, my view on this generally is now go to a specialist. There are a bunch of really good companies out there who can find research participants. They're probably, in the long run, you're going to waste a lot less time and money. You usually have lower dropouts because they're very good at like priming people and making sure they actually turn up. So although that is the slight, I know it can be a constraint with budget, but ultimately it's about the value of the insights you get and the impact that can have on the design of the product. And as when you go into any form of research, don't just do research for research's sake. Define the objectives. What is it that you're hoping to find out? What is it that you want to learn from this? What is it that you don't know and need to understand more about? And also just what are our assumptions? What are we assuming about these things? How confident are we in those assumptions? An exercise I've begun to run fairly recently, and you can all have this, is at the start of a research project or when some research is planned, and I get the people who have an interest in the outcome of the research, and we talk about the users, and we put a scale along the wall from very confident to not at all confident. And basically every time someone makes a statement about the user behavior or the user need, we get them to place it on that scale as to how confident they are. We also have a column called facts and a column called questions, because often you're going to get questions, people will kind of say, we'd like to know this, and that's cool, well we don't know it, so let's have somewhere to record it. The facts column is often empty after those sessions. We do it to give people the option. Occasionally someone will say, like, we've got this specific piece of data that says people are doing X, and that's cool, let's put it there then. But often just actually kind of creating an environment where people are happy to admit, actually, yeah, we don't know this. We think we know, we're pretty sure, but we're not entirely confident in that fact. So it's about and it does help, especially if you're facilitating one of those sessions with your team or with your clients, to put up a couple, admit, yeah, actually I don't know this thing, and just be really open about it and put it on there. And then people will start to bounce off that, and but that's my number one way for planning user research. And then basically I'll take that away, distill it down to some clear research objectives, and after that's where we go away and start writing discussion guides or planning tasks or other sorts of things. Another great way is to create hypotheses. So hypotheses are a kind of way of recording your assumptions or recording your predictions about what might happen. So the best way to do it is write a statement which can be validated, so it's kind of true or false. Make a prediction, so actually make a prediction about the impact on users or how users will behave. It's okay if it's wrong, that's the whole point, right? We're testing, it's not a test of you though, it'll feel like I'm moderating something now. But it's just kind of a test of our assumptions and helping us understand, is that prediction true or false? And regardless, it's going to help us knowing the truth about that. Include a cause and effect, so we believe that doing X will result in Y. And make it measurable, so actually if it's about reduction of time to do a task, or it's increase in satisfaction, there's lots of different ways of measuring user satisfaction, just try and make a measurable prediction, because that can be really important. Again, it doesn't matter if it's wrong. It's about just kind of, sometimes as well, the kind of predictions that people make and the measures they put against them will kind of also dictate how confident they are. But ultimately, why does this matter? Well, if we think that if we make product A, we're going to make £70 million in profit more. Okay, that's cool. Well, let's write that down. Let's research it. And actually, if we find in the research that we're not going to make £70 million profit, probably better to know in the research rather than just building it, shipping it, and hoping for the best. So, writing tasks. Ultimately, the good thing about remote moderated research is you can write tasks in the same way you typically write tasks for usability testing. I'd say it's definitely one of the advantages over like self-moderated platforms where you're at the mercy of the user interpreting and the participant interpreting the task themselves. So ultimately, I'd say generally write the task, create a discussion guide, avoid leading questions. Anyone who's done user research or who's read books on user research broadly knows this, so I'm not going to spend loads of time on it. But I'd say generally most of the tasks that you can do in a lab-based environment you can do as remote moderated. So, lean UX. I'd say that my view anyway, and this is that design is an assumption about how to meet user needs. It's kind of the manifestation of that assumption. So it might also be around, business needs, it might be around kind of various other things. But ultimately, we put all those different kind of competing ideas or assumptions or predictions or data, and we put it together, and it manifests itself as a design. And the question, of course, is how is that assumption about how to meet user needs, is that based on evidence or is it based on a web of other assumptions? So the advantage to lean UX is really about getting those assumptions out really early, testing, kind of iterating on the design as we learn the truth or validity of those assumptions. And based on the theme of the talk, it is about learning faster and reducing waste in the process. So if only I knew some kind of research methodology which might allow me to do research more frequently, a bit cheaper and a bit quicker in order to eliminate assumptions early. Ultimately, though, it's about just basically executing this loop quicker in order to win competitively. So it's about measure it, it's about building something, or it doesn't have to actually be building it in the development sense, but it's about building something, measuring the impact on users, whether that's kind of using quantitative or qualitative measurement, and learning about how right were we, how wrong were we, what can we learn from that, and how can we use that to improve the product, and basically executing that cycle quicker and quicker. So let's talk about MVPs. Now this is such an abused term. It's minimum viable products. Now I think it's just kind of been co-opted a bit by people to release like something that's not really, they might say it's a minimum viable product, that's probably minimum buildable product. And actually it's about, it's been used as kind of almost, it's used for like phase one. It's kind of implying that there'll be a phase two, which is a lie project managers usually tell people. But it's ultimately minimum viable products are the smallest thing we can build to test our assumptions around user behaviour. And I've actually just stolen that off of Jeff Gothelf, unwilling. So yeah, as witness to my theft, we've got Jeff's quote up there. It's Jeff Gothelf, not Gothelf. When back at my old agency, we ended up making a load of UX explainer videos, which I will put back up on YouTube at some point after removing the branding. And Kenton, who drew all of the animations for our thing, decided to draw him as a literal goth elf, which was interesting. But he's written a really good book on lean UX, and he's written a load of other stuff more recently around kind of how organisations can sense kind of user behaviour, respond to it, and kind of broader service design topics. I think he's got another one that's coming out soon as well, on basically how to be employed for life, or how to always be employable, which I saw him plug earlier. But yeah, it's definitely author worth reading on the subject. But actually, the main point is that with minimum viable products, it doesn't always need to be let's build a thing or build a like slightly shitter version of a thing. Actually, so I know some of these are well-known examples now. For example, Dropbox, their MVP was making a video that made it look like the service worked in the way that it was intended to work, and they put up a crowdfunding page and sort of saw how many people would opt into it on that basis. So it was a really good way, because actually if you think about building something that complex, how many servers and how much like clever stuff you'd have to have working that I don't entirely understand in order to make it work, actually, you know, and all that storage space and like the infrastructure to do it, selling it first was a really, you know, by kind of showing the benefit to users and then seeing how many people effectively would part with their money for it, was a really good way to validate their assumptions around that business model. Split testing, so I mean this could be typical A/B testing, it could be multivariate testing, but sometimes if we've got kind of, especially with smaller design changes, it depends what you're trying to measure. So I'd say that often A/B testing can be used as a bit of a blunt instrument. I remember Google's like 48 shades of blue or whatever it was before. But generally, if you're kind of, you know, if you've got a hypothesis, we believe that introducing a bigger button will increase conversion by 10%, and we'll know this is true when that happens. You know, that kind of thing. You can run some A/B testing, and actually that might be a minimum viable product for that change. Simulate the service. So if you're, you know, when people start talking about doing very clever things with AI or all sorts of kind of very clever tech, actually you don't have to really do it to validate the assumption. You don't need to build it all. Actually, what you can do is you could just have someone sat there, probably kind of maybe someone who you've borrowed from customer service, pretending to be a chatbot for a bit, and you basically give them scripts and rules to follow. But it's a lot cheaper than building that kind of thing and then realizing it's wrong. I know there are lots of other ways potentially you can do this stuff as well, and there are plenty of other talks on the subject. Yeah, but basically, the other thing, of course, you could prototype it, so you could fire up a tool like Azure or Figma or InVision, those, and you could build a prototype. You could put it in front of some users using any of those research methodologies, maybe remote moderated user research, in order to test how users react to it, how correct your assumptions around usability and kind of maybe aesthetics as well, and lots of other things could be. You can also run a smoke test as well. So I'd use this one with caution. Basically, this is where you have, typically you might link on your digital product to a feature that doesn't exist. And if anyone clicks the button, track how many people click it, track how many people will sign up to maybe a list or something to be told when that feature ships, and use that kind of almost that ratio of how many people have clicked on it versus how many people have parted with their data as a result of it to work out whether it's worth building the feature. With my pure user-centered design hat on, I think that that's a valid thing to do, but don't make your entire product into a load of buttons that don't work. I know it sounds obvious, but I've seen so many people just get like too much in the thrall of this kind of thing. They've read like the Lean Startup too many times and just jump on this stuff. And actually it's, so sounds obvious, but I think a lot of people have done it. So this is based on broadly what I was doing at my old agency. So with a lot of our clients, we would work in 2-week sprints, and typically we'd divide our time. It wouldn't be entirely kind of like chunked up like this, but effectively we would start off by kind of planning out like the user flows, the information architecture of the features we were working on. We would then do some kind of interaction design and rapid prototyping. We'd very quickly then put it in front of users using remote moderated user research. We'd analyze the research, and when we actually demoed things to clients, we would demo it with the context of how people would use it. And that made a remarkable difference to our work, because what we found was that the discussions we'd have about features and about design and about kind of the impact of the things we were designing with clients were a lot more valuable, because suddenly it changed from how, you know, kind of this kind of a discussion. So I think anyone who's sat there as a client, and I've worked clients over the past, I get it. you kind of feel like you have to contribute something in those, that you have to make some kind of feedback. Is because, you know, it feels like that's your part to play, right? And it is, but actually the discussions we had became a lot more valuable. It went away from kind of more subjective stuff, like my wife's cat doesn't like blue or something, more down the route of, you know, we saw that like Jeff really struggled, or like Doris really struggled with that feature on the product. So how can we help? You know, it actually became a lot more about like kind of how can we meet the user needs better? How can we solve that problem for users? And actually it was great. It's great, like really beautiful, attractive design that flew under the radar and got changed a lot less. And actually we focused a lot more working with the clients on how to meet user needs. And I think I've run this process in-house before as well. I'm kind of getting something in place very similar to this right now, where we managed to do like 3 iterations of new dashboard design in 2 weeks with 2 rounds of research. And the good thing is we've been able to present this to the decisions we've made to the CEO with the context of the user research. And again, really useful and valuable discussions around how those features will behave, how we can make that feature more useful for users. And it's not perfect yet, but that rapid iteration has reduced a lot of potential waste. So again, like I was kind of saying, you can then make your demos, whether it's a sprint demo. You don't have to do Agile necessarily, but when you show stuff to people who can affect the design and affect the decision making, showing how users interact with things can ultimately make that decision making process more user focused. So getting permission. Now, if you're not doing a lot of user research at the moment, ultimately that can be quite tricky to begin with, especially if you've got a secure budget and that kind of thing. I think my recommendation would always be that perhaps beg, steal or borrow participants maybe for the first round, even if you happen to have some friends, for example, who would broadly be the one who'd be the target audience. I wouldn't say moderate them yourself though, and make it clear that, or don't make it clear that you're involved in the design in any way. Try and get someone else to moderate and try and get them to be as kind of honest and brutal as possible. Because I think I generally caution people against using like people they know as participants. I think there's no substitute for like professionally recruited participants. But initially, if you're just trying to give kind of like a sense of user research or get people to kind of understand like the benefits, and you've got some people you're able to co-opt into doing it, just to kind of show like this is how it could be. It could be even better than this if we could have proper participants. And most workplaces now have a preferred video conferencing tool that you can usually get access to. So if you can pull those 2 things together, then you can begin to try remote moderated user research with a fairly low barrier to entry. And once you've done it, and you can begin to share the insights and show how it potentially can help decision making, then you'll begin to get that buy-in to get the participants. I know sometimes it's a big ask in some organizations. Some organizations really don't care that much about their users. But the other thing as well, actually, if you do have a database of people who use your product or service or website frequently or occasionally, and you have permission to contact them, often marketing people can help you with that as well. And again, it's if you can just put those first few sessions together and begin to show the benefit and the like ease of doing it, then it tends to snowball within organizations and you can get more and more buy-in to doing things like this. So, takeaways from it. I really love remote moderate research, so please, if you get a chance, give it a try. Pick the right tool for your users. So, like I said earlier, if they're all on Google Hangouts, you're probably going on there. If you've got loads of research budget, which is a great problem to have, don't suddenly reduce your budgets because you do research cheaper. I'd always recommend trying to basically do more research with the same budget. You make sure when planning any research, regardless of whether you're doing remote moderated or any other methodology, go into it with clear objectives and write hypotheses. Try and just commit to something. You don't have to stick to it afterwards, but it's just about making sure, because you will find things out that you didn't intend to find out as well, and that's totally okay. But generally, when you plan, you should focus research around specific objectives, because otherwise there's no clear direction, and it'll make it harder to kind of assess or analyze multiple sessions. And as I was saying kind of a couple of slides ago, just try incorporating that user research. Could be into prototyping sprints, it could be into development sprints. If you've got like kind of a really good agile culture and people are shipping things very regularly, they're willing to let you reprioritize maybe the next sprint based on user research, there are probably points at which you can test real things as well. It doesn't all just have to be prototypes and stuff like that. So yeah, I think pretty much at this point, any questions? And if you are looking for a job, so I'm specifically hiring a product designer role and then a more kind of classic graphic designer with print and events type role, which has ended up in my team, which I'm really actually excited about because there's a good chance to have an impact on all that stuff. We're building quite a cool product. We have a bunch of other jobs though, so if anyone's looking for any jobs at the moment, Immersive Labs is actually quite wicked. I haven't had a boss in like 9 years and I've agreed to go there. So yeah, I haven't just been drinking the Kool-Aid either. I've been there like a couple of months now, and like, it's really like really good culture, loads of people who really care about what they're doing and want to build something great. So, but it is Bristol, so it's not Swindon, but can't have everything. So yeah, basically, I guess any questions? I'm just going to have a quick sip as well, as my voice seems to be going again, but thank you.
I have a question. So you mentioned optimal workshop earlier.
Yeah.
It's like a good tool for doing some remote research.
Yeah.
Is there any other tools that you would recommend?
So I think
Or websites?
It's interesting. So in the tree testing and kind of card sorting market, there have been a few companies recently, but they seem to go bust very quickly. So Optimal Workshop, unfortunately, seems to have a bit of a monopoly, which is why it's really expensive. But it is I do see it as a really good tool. In terms of other tools, typical like survey tools, and also tools that you wouldn't necessarily associate with research. So for example, if you're doing a simple card sort, maybe like Trello, just kind of begin to think about tools that you use, maybe in different ways, and like how you could maybe just like, not like hack them, that's probably the wrong word, but just look at the things you use every day and think about how you could get something different out of it.
So I'm just asking personal questions now.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you're looking at tools for remote research. So have you ever trialled or used web like services that you can do remote research with that you can get participants through?
Yeah.
Not like an agency like people for research, but like websites that do similar things.
Yeah, so there's testing time. There's who else? Respondents.io. So testing time seems to basically be like Roots or people for research. Roots are great, by the way, if no one's ever tried them for B2B recruitment. Yes, so Respondent is a good B2B tool. It uses LinkedIn primarily. And when people lie on the screeners, it's really weird. You can see their LinkedIn profile, but you have to spend some time screening yourself. But that's one I've used when I've had to do the recruitment myself. Testing time seems to be basically a research agency with a web front end to it. Word of caution, actually, like usertesting.com. With their participants, you will end up spending a lot of time like screening people out afterwards. Because like they have people who I think sit there and just do it all day and kind of grind through doing user research sessions. So yeah, I'd say like generally I always advocate like picking tools where like the recruitment and the tool for delivering the work are kind of split out. But yeah, those online tools can be valuable. And I think the other thing to try as well is maybe like advertising on social media but it depends how manual you want the process to be.
Yeah, so we've used LinkedIn and stuff to recruit. Again, people that follow your channels are going to generally know who you are as well, which kind of like...
Yeah, that's the thing really, isn't it? It's like, sometimes it's valuable to test with like existing customers or people who are aware of you, but also it sometimes can be really valuable to speak to people who've never heard of you.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, if you're using something like WebEx or Skype, is that purely just to have the conversation? Because you're not going to see what they're doing on screen, or can you?
No, you can get them to screen share.
I
So-
see what you mean, you do it that way.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously we like, I don't know if it's because of how I plan research, but often we'll have kind of like a bit of a depth interview type thing where we have a discussion and do like some contextual stuff, and then also get them to try some web stuff. I will split them occasionally, but I think it's just how sessions have usually come together. So yeah, basically any video conferencing tool that lets you share screens is pretty much all you need for that.
Would you be able to record those sessions to like look back over?
Yes. So
Okay, I don't know enough about those.
So some of those things have video recording built in.
Right, okay.
You might want to use something like ScreenFlow or Camtasia though to do the recording, which are kind of they're typically one-off costs. If you do that, the advantage is then you can get 2-channel audio, which when you make video highlights to share, you can cut off the moderator track, which in depth interviews you don't want to do. But when you're showing highlight reels of say like 20 users or something, or participants, sorry, interacting with like the same checkout funnel, you might not want to hear the questions over and over again. So typically, I tend to use like another tool for screen recording.
Okay, thank you.
But Zoom, which and WebEx as well, and I think most of them now actually have built-in video recording. So if you don't want to spend anything above the licensing costs for those, then that works.
What about for mobile or mobile apps?
So mobile apps, this is one reason that I tend to advocate Zoom, because they've got really good apps on iOS and Android. They can do full screen sharing, so then you can kind of just get people to fire up a mobile website or a prototype or an app.
Yeah.
Sometimes I guess if it's actually a real app that you're testing rather than the prototype one, sometimes it can be a bit of a fuss to get it onto their phone. But yeah, that side of things does work really well.
You can still run like if you've done a prototype on actual.
Oh yeah.
You can still run that and share the screen.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I don't know. I mean, if someone was interacting with it on mobile, I'd tend to just give them the Azure link.
Yeah.
Or actually, a quick tip actually I found that's really useful is to make bit.ly links for pretty much everything you need to get users to type in themselves. And always don't stick to the auto-generated ones either. Just change it to like the one I always do is like a standard word and then a colour. Because if you use a bunch of numbers, we have to say like uppercase V, lowercase w, x, 2, dash. No, it's that one. You know, it really doesn't work. So I'd just say like make them human readable, make them all in lowercase, and it will save you so much trouble. Cool. Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone for coming out tonight. Anyway, yeah, really appreciate your time.
So our next meet-up is going to be in March. I believe it's going to be March 5th, so the start of the month. And we have the I think her name is Rogachuva. I'm probably pronouncing that very badly. But she's going to be running a talk on UX and agile methodologies. So yeah, look out for that one meet-up. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming tonight.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the same thing. I'm glad you asked that.